Hi everyone and welcome to this week's book review. I'm sorry it's been so long, there's been all sorts going on, so I finally got round to doing another one. And what I've been reading recently is this. So I thought I'd review this for you today. It's The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And if you haven't read it yet, please do go out and buy a copy and read it because it's a great book. Now, it was actually chosen to be given out at World Book Night this year, so hundreds of free copies were given out around the country on the 23rd of April to get people into reading. And it is one of those books that loads of people, whether they like reading or not, do seem to be really enjoying. I've read some of Matt Haig's books before, and he's just such a great writer, bringing bits of like fantasy in with every day, and it's just such a good mix. And it's a very uplifting book. It also won the People's Choice Award at the Goodreads Awards, and it was voted for by the public. So it shows that average everyday people are absolutely loving it. So I'm really excited to review this for you today. So, the book tells the story of a woman called Nora Seed, who's the 13-something-year-old woman from Bedford, and right at the beginning of the book she decides that she wants to die. Now, it's something you find out right at the beginning, so it's not a spoiler, but it does make for quite a hard-hitting opening. And it makes it clear that the book's not about how she gets to this point. It seems like that's going to be the climax of the book, but it's actually about what happens once she's made that decision and how maybe she could change her mind and reverse that thought. It sounds quite depressing, but it's actually really not a depressing book at all, and the story is actually really uplifting. So this book in a way did sort of remind me of the film It's a Wonderful Life, where the main character in that film, if you've not seen it, it's about a man called George Bailey who decides that his life's not worth living anymore, and so he decides that he wants to die. And at that point an angel comes and intervenes, and he's shown what his life would be like if he wasn't in it and what would happen to all the people he cared about. So it's a story about not regretting your actions and showing how your life really is worth something. It's a similar sort of idea in The Midnight Library. For Nora, on the night she chooses to die, she's transported. It doesn't really go as she expects, because she's transported to this library, it's an endless library full of loads of bookshelves, and it's managed by her old school librarian, Mrs. Elm. Not exactly who you expect to see in a supernatural library. And all the books on the shelves contain versions of her life which could have been if she'd made different decisions in life. So in one, she is a glaciologist and gets to go to the Antarctic and see what it would be like to live there. And in another, she is a pop star because she used to be in a band. So it's all these lives based on decisions she made or didn't make. And so she gets the chance to go into this life and become that version of herself and see if her life would be any better if she made that decision. So she only leaves that life when she decides that she doesn't want it anymore, and then she fades out and goes back to the library. So it's a really interesting concept, and it gives the real world novel sort of a fantasy edge, because when you're in one of the normal worlds in one of these lives, there's nothing fantasy about it at all really, but then you get transported back to the library and you sort of remember, oh yeah, it's a fantasy book, but real world. So it really can connect with lots of people because there is all these real world elements to the fantasy bits, and we all really have regrets of things that we've done or not done, and things we think, oh, I wish I'd done that differently, or what would have happened if I'd done that. So it will strike a chord with a lot of people, and they'll find that they can relate to it. So I think that's why so many people are really loving this book, because there's so much that you can relate to and connect with. But it's a bit like, my sister summed it up really well as well. She's reading it at the minute, and she said it's a bit like those dreams you have where it's your life but things are slightly different and it's not quite right, and so you find yourself fading out of the dreams and waking up because you realise that it's a dream because it doesn't seem quite real. It's a bit like that in these lives for Nora, where she realises, oh, this isn't right, this shouldn't be like that. And she fades out and goes back to the library. And we sort of want Will look Nora on to do well in these lives, because we want her to find something that she's going to be happy in and do really well in. But at the same time, we sort of hope she'll go back to her normal life and find that her normal life is worth living. So in terms of characters, it's quite interesting because Nora is actually the only character we get to know fully. We don't know a huge amount about her at the start. We just know she's from Bedford and she wants to die, and that she works at this music shop. But we find out more about her as she goes on, and as the book progresses. But in contrast, the other characters feel a little bit paper thin, because they pop in and out of all of these lives, but you don't get to know one version of them fully. You get to know all these different alternate versions based on decisions she's made. But it's very clever because it does show that decisions we make in life really influence others and affects what choices somebody else might make, or something they might do or not do, or where they might be in life. So it's really clever and makes us think about how we live our lives and how we can influence other people for good. So the chapter length is actually quite clever. Some of the chapters are not all really equal lengths. Some of them are quite long and go into a lot of detail about her experiences in all these different lives. But some of them are literally a page long and list her thought processes, or in one of them it's just song lyrics which link into the chapter before, and it's something the reader was interested in, and it sort of is a nice flow through point into the next chapter. So I think it's very clever and shows that our thought processes aren't all equal. There's one point in the story as well where the pace of the story picks up a bit, and this is really reflected in the writing, where it becomes more of a storyteller story, where you're told Nora did this and then she did this and then she went there, and it's like you are told what happens rather than it being described. And it shows how she's not really attached to that section of her life, and it's so fleeting that we just get told what happens and it's not something she's attached to. I think that makes very, very clever writing. And other sections go into a lot of detail with the descriptions and how she's feeling. And so yeah, I think the writing and the way the chapters are done is just very clever. So the themes of the book are really clear from the outset, about acceptance of the choices we make in life, about regret and not focusing on regret, and how life isn't always perfect, and how we can actually influence others by the choices we make. And ultimately, even though Nora goes through all of these depressing things and she doesn't know where she's going, it ultimately is a book of hope, and about how we can make such a difference in people's lives through some small acts of kindness. And the author, Matt Haig, seems to make this idea of mental health and looking after your mental well-being, it seems to be a focus of a lot of his books. The previous book of his, I listened to the audiobook, was How to Stop Time. And that's about a man who was born in Tudor times, who finds he's got this rare condition, which means once he reaches an adulthood, he only ages 1 day every year, and so he's still alive today. And he's part of this society called the Seagull Society, who tell him, it's people like him, and they tell him, you have got to keep everything you do secret, and you've got to move lives every few months, and you're never allowed to fall in love. And it's a really, really interesting premise about his mental health, and also the search for his daughter comes into it as well. And that's just, it seems to be a theme of a lot of his books, and it clearly is in the Midnight Library. But I've since found out that the author has been through a lot of mental health problems of his own and does suffer from depression. He seems to have made it part of his life's work to help people through this kind of thing and to write about it. So, at the age of 24, he was on the verge of committing suicide and was one step away. So he seems to put this across in a lot of his books about how we do always have an other option in our life, and his writing is just so uplifting and so clever. But it's got the right amount of action in it, and also just laugh out loud sections, and uncertainty as well, which just make them so readable. So there's probably a lot more that I could say about the Midnight Library, which I'll probably remember once the camera's stopped. But it's also very hard to talk about any more of it without spoiling anything. So all I'm going to say is please go out and read it and see what you think of it. And please put your comments below this video and let me know what you think. and please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of future videos. Okay, bye everyone.